Konnichiwa, Pakusei-tachi. I'm Puppy-Sensei, the Puppy Girl Japanese teacher VTuber of Iriami West. I make Japanese language content to help you level up your abilities, and I love my new hat. Look at my swishy hat. Look at my swishy hat. Anyway, today we're looking at the grammatical phrase koto ni naru. We would consider koto ni naru to be N3 grammar. We're going to go through this pretty quickly, so stay with me. Here's the grammar card for this one. So here is koto ni naru. The meaning is basically that something has been decided, or in some cases could mean something like it turns out that something or another. It can also sometimes be used to express that something is a settled matter. For example, we might see sentences where koto ni naru is used to simply express that things are a certain way and there's nothing that we can do about it. More on this soon. This is a phrase that's going to follow a verb, and that verb is either going to show up as the dictionary form or the nai form. And actually, this is a grammar point that I enjoy quite a bit, so I'm excited to talk with you about it. Based on what we're seeing here, koto ni naru follows either a positive or a negative verb in the non-past. Let me give you the 10-penny quick example that explains the difference between these two constructions, the positive and the negative. Alright, so first the positive. Kyou wa, today, koto ni naru to iu bunpo. Koto ni naru to iu bunpo. A couple of things are going on in this segment. To iu is not the grammar point that we're covering today, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But altogether, koto ni naru to iu bunpo means the grammar point known as koto ni naru, or the koto ni naru grammar. Yeah? And then we have o, and that's our direct object marker. It marks that koto ni naru grammar point, or koto ni naru to iu bunpo, is the object of the verb oshieru, which means to teach. And finally, koto ni naru at the end implies that it is decided that, or it turns out that, and that's what I'm going to be teaching in this particular grammar point. I know that koto ni naru appears twice in the sentence, please don't get confused. What I'm saying here is the koto ni naru to iu bunpo, the koto ni naru grammar point, is the point that has been decided for me to teach today, or it is the case that we are going to be looking at that today. Okay, so I want to call your attention to a couple of things in this sentence. One, the koto ni naru at the end of this sentence is in the present tense. It's non-past. For this reason, I'm translating this sentence as it has been decided that I'm going to teach you the koto ni naru grammar point, right? But a very, very much more specific kind of way that we can translate this would be more like it turns out that today I'm going to be teaching you the koto ni naru grammar point, right? Because technically speaking, it has been decided really should be used more literally for the past tense version of koto ni naru. Yeah? But we're going to talk about tense and this grammar point a little bit so that I can better help you understand exactly what's going on here. I think that you're going to find that the interplay between tense and grammar actually does make pretty good sense here. But the second thing that I wanted to call your attention to here is the actual delineation of parts of the segments within this sentence. So I'd like to take a look at what we have at a really skeletal level here. There are really kind of three things going on, right? So the three kind of important elements in this sentence, if we're going to start from the back, we'll start with koto ni naru. Koto ni naru is telling us that it turns out that something is some way, right? It's a settled matter. It turns out that this is just the way that things happen, okay? Koto ni naru to iu bunpo o oshieru, all of that together tells us what has been determined, right? And what was determined is that the koto ni naru grammar point is going to be taught. Yeah? So that's kind of the middle section of the sentence. That in and of itself could be its own thought, right? So koto ni naru to iu bunpo o oshieru just means I teach the koto ni naru grammar point or grammar. Ne? But the addition of the koto ni naru at the end of the sentence tells us that that thing has been determined. Okay? But I want you to notice an important distinction here. Contextually, the kyo wa aspect of this sentence applies to the action that has been determined and not necessarily the timing of the determination itself. So our final point here, our final segment within this sentence is the kyo wa. And you could also think of that as being part of a broader sentence. Kyo wa koto ni naru toyu bunpo o oshieru. That means today I teach the koto ni naru grammar point. Okay? Koto ni naru at the end of the sentence, it is this way, or it turns out, or it has been decided, is not necessarily kind of attached to the kyo wa. Okay? So it's not, it was decided today, on this day, that I will teach you the koto ni naru grammar point, but rather the sentence is much more closely, it has been decided that I'm going to teach you the koto ni naru grammar point today, right? So our final segment of this sentence, this kyo wa, really belongs in the sentence about me teaching the grammar point and not in the sentence about the determination that has been made. Does that make sense? I want you to understand that the real sentence here is just the part before the koto ni naru, and the koto ni naru is kind of an addendum or an afterthought that says it was decided that that's what we're going to do today. Okay. Now, I want to change the oshieru verb here into the nai form so that we can better understand what that change does to our sentence. Oshieru by itself just means to teach. We've already kind of determined that, right? So if we convert the verb oshieru into the nai form, we're going to get oshienai, to not teach. That means to not teach. And that gives us this new sentence. Kyou wa koto ni naru toyu bunpo o oshienai koto ni naru. ですね. Check the distinction in translation here. By changing the verb that has been modified by koto ni naru from oshieru to oshienai, we change the meaning from the sentence that we're changing the meaning from it turns out that I will be into it turns out that I will not be. On the other hand, if we wanted to say it has not been determined, then we actually need to conjugate the naru in koto ni naru, which itself is its own verb. So naru here is a verb, right? But we don't want to change the verb that is being modified by koto ni naru into the nai form and then think that that means that the thing has not been determined. It's still been determined because koto ni naru is still positive. So koto ni naru by itself is always going to be something turns out to be some particular way. Something turns out to be some particular case, right? And if the verb that's being modified by koto ni naru is in the negative, then the important distinction here is that it turns out that something will not be happening, or it has been determined that something will not be happening, not that it hasn't been determined, right? In order to get that kind of meaning, we would instead need to conjugate koto ni naru into the nai form. Okay, so far we've been using the present tense or the non-past version of koto ni naru. Actually though, koto ni naru is much more frequently used in the past tense. That's because when we use the past tense of koto ni naru, which would be either koto ni natta in the casual form or koto ni narimashita in the polite form, we're instead really capturing the meaning that something has been set in stone. It's settled. It's done. I'm really fond of saying that the past tense in Japanese really should be thought of as the completed tense. Taken care of, done, settled, over, right? And so, when we change koto ni naru to koto ni natta or koto ni narimashita, we're getting the sense that something has been settled. Something has been determined. It's been determined. That determination has been made, and it's set in stone. Okay? So now let's look and see exactly how that koto ni natta, right? Koto ni natta changes our sentence. Okay? So, new sentence. 今日はことになるという文法を教えることになった。What's the difference between these two sentences that I'm showing above? Honestly, not a lot, right? So one we can kind of translate into English as, it turns out that this thing is happening. And the other we can kind of translate as, it was decided that this thing is happening, right? It has been decided that this thing is happening. Really, at the end of the day, these two sentences mean something relatively similar. What are we getting by putting something in the past tense? We're really just saying it's settled, it's done, it's over, it has kind of taken root. The decision has been made, and we're not going back on that decision. Okay? We're not going back. We're not going back. Anyway, this is why we see that the past tense version of koto ni naru, right, that koto ni natta or koto ni narimashita, is seen far more often than just koto ni naru by itself, that non-past version. The distinction between these two is so subtle that it's far easier to just use koto ni natta or koto ni narimashita to express that something has already been decided. Okay? The koto ni naru form doesn't really express much that's different. It really just means that it turns out that something is in a certain way, which isn't all that different from it has been determined that something or another. Now, this is a high-level linguistics kind of a concept, but I think when two different grammatical forms mean something very, very, very similar and their meanings are not very well delineated between one another, in the end, we kind of get a survival of the fittest sort of situation. And since they are so similar, I really believe in my heart that koto ni natta just kind of became the default. And so koto ni naru, while you still can use it and you still should know it, I certainly feel that the past tense or completed tense version, koto ni natta or koto ni narimashita, is much more common. However, let me now explain briefly why we only ever use this grammar point with the non-past verb, right? We're always going to use the dictionary form of the verb or the nai form, right? Which we can think of as sort of the present tense or non-past form of the verb. What happens if we try to put a past tense verb before koto ni naru? We end up with a sentence that's not really grammatical. So let's take a look. 今日はことになるという文法を教えたことになった。This is a problem. This is a problem on multiple levels, right? But even just at the level of the semantics here, just at the level of the translation, if we put a past tense verb in place of 教える or 教えない before ことになる, then we're getting this weird case where it was determined now that something happened that had already been completed. And it kind of feels like maybe we ought to be able to create such a sentence. Maybe we should be able to create a sentence that means something like, it came to pass that I would have already done such and such thing. But ultimately, that's just so clunky, and in Japanese, we're not going to use koto ni naru to express something like that. Now, I think this is actually putting the cart ahead of the umamusume, but basically that's because koto ni naru, or koto ni natta, expresses that things just kind of turn out to be a certain way. It's just the way that things happened. Things happen in such a way that this is how it just occurred, and this is how things got settled. Which actually, I think means we should quickly amend our grammar card with an additional point that I did not show you before. And that's this. When we use koto ni naru, we're saying that something ended up being a certain way, or that things were decided in a particular way. However, we didn't really have a part to play in making that decision happen, right? With koto ni naru, things just happen to shake out that way. It's just the way that it happened. It was determined, or it is this case, and you didn't necessarily have anything to do with it. But if you did have some level of agency in making this decision happen, we'll use a different grammar point, and that grammar point is koto ni suru, which basically means that you made it come to pass that something would happen. Okay? That's a bit of an aside, but this is kind of one last thing that I want to say about the conjugation of koto ni naru. Naru is, as I've been saying all along, a verb, and that means that we can conjugate that into the negative too. Alright? Another new sentence here. 今日はことになるという文法を教えることにならない。ことにならない。Okay? We translate this as, it's not the case that today I'm going to be teaching you the koto ni naru grammar. When we conjugate the koto ni naru into the negative, we change the meaning of the sentence in such a way that I think this feels pretty logical. It really just becomes a sentence where the meaning is, it's not the case, or it wasn't determined that, or it didn't end up being the case that. Right? I think that makes pretty good sense. Okay. Before we close the book on koto ni naru for now, there's one final thing that I want to say. As I said previously, sometimes when we use koto ni naru, we can express simply the idea that things are the way that they are, okay? So sometimes koto ni naru will just express that it is what it is, okay? And I'd like to share an example sentence that expresses this idea. Here's our sentence. 今年もリーフスは負けることになっています。Listen, I'm not happy about it either. Anyway, the sentence is kotoshi, this year. Mo is a particle that implies again, right? It takes the place of the wa particle, and it signifies something like this year, which is going to be the same as all other years, or other years. And what's going to happen in this year that's the same as many other years? The Leafs, the Toronto Maple Leafs, right, are not gonna win. They're gonna lose again this year, right? The Leafs are being marked by the wa subject marker, meaning the Leafs are subject to the verb makeru. They're the subject of this verb makeru, which means to lose. Makeru is in the dictionary form so that it can take koto ni natte imasu. Koto ni natte imasu. And koto ni natte imasu is the koto ni naru verb in the te iru form. So that's that naru verb in the te iru form. Ordinarily, we think of te iru as an ongoing action. Just like the sentence, ramen o tabete iru. That means I am currently eating ramen. But with koto ni naru, the te iru form creates a situation where things just are the way they are. It expresses that based on law, or precedent, or just fate, things are gonna be the way that they are gonna be, right? And so, my beloved Leafs are destined for another losing season. So be it. I'm sorry for the hockey tangent. Anyway, I think that's all that we have to say about koto ni naru for now. So, let's spin our wheel of grammar. Next week, we're going to be learning the particle ga? The particle ga, but I just did a whole lesson on particles. Well, ga suru koto ni natta. It's been determined that we're gonna do ga, so that's what we're gonna do. Reminder that I'm actually out of town next week. I'm traveling across the country for a huge gaming convention. You can probably guess which one. I'm very excited. Anyway, next week I will be putting out some content, but no streams, of course, because, you know, convention and busy. For now, though, I'll see you next week. Mata raishu! Thanks for watching. I'm glad you watched until the end. You can find my other content here. Also, it would make me really happy if you would check out jinxedgaming.com. If you're into zero-calorie gaming fuel and Oshi cups, you will love their products. Puppy-Sensei recommends the tangy strawberry flavor. It's so yummy. Remember to use code SENSEI at checkout for 10% off your order. Can't wait to see you next time. Mata ne!